I'm wanting to add this model to my collection. There's just two problems. One, it's out of print, and two, I can't afford it secondhand. So today, we're gonna see if I can make a better Fantasy Stagecoach than Games Workshop. And can it just come from stuff that I have lying around my house? So one of the things I've always struggled with when it comes to scratch building models is maintaining that consistent scale. I find it really helpful to draw all my templates at a 1-to-1 scale on graph paper. I mean, we don't want to build a wagon that's just so large, no horse could ever actually pull it. Again. I mean, at this point, we're basically playing 2D Minecraft. And look at that. My shipment of crafting material just arrived. And this build's secret sauce is cardboard.
That's a fact.
And then just glued all the cardboard pieces together so we have a nice frame to build our wagon onto. So I think it's about time for a coffee break. Because really, we just need a bunch of coffee stir sticks. We're gonna need more coffee sticks than that. No, I mean, more. So really the trick here is we're gonna use these coffee stir sticks like they're wooden planks. That's gonna make our model look less like a cardboard box and more like a wooden box. And then once the glue dried, I took my clippers and gave my wagon a little bit of a haircut. Once I got all the coffee stir sticks glued on the side of the wagon, I started covering up some more cardboard seams with some craft foam. But I really wasn't liking this look. That's okay though, because it was also about this time I realized I kind of did the thing I didn't want to do, and I made the wagon too large for my horses. So despite my best efforts, I don't think there's a 90-degree angle on this entire build, but we're just gonna pretend like that's on purpose and call it style. So now that I got a good start on a nice wooden crate, it's time to make it a little bit more Warhammery. And when you want to make something look like it belongs to the Warhammer world, you kind of have two options. The first being
Stairs.
And the second being
Wooden timbers.
I decided that I should probably go with wooden beams for this build. So I'm bulking out the sides of the wagon to give it a very distinct build or look or wagon style that I'm pretty sure never existed in history. You'll notice that Wagon 2.0 no longer has the door and the windows cut out. It was just way easier just to glue these on top. So speaking of doors and windows, I guess it's about time I show you how I built them. So to make the glass, I used a piece of aluminum foil and covered it with some drywall tape I had left over from when I like to pretend I'm actually good at home repair projects. And afterwards, I got to make tiny little window frames for my tiny little windows. It was so much fun. Now do it 3 more times. Next, I cut out the smallest bit of craft foam and glued it to the side of the door to look like hinges. I then glued this little thing to the bottom of the door. I guess it's like weather stripping or something. I mean, we don't want our little guys dying of exposure. Then I went ahead and bulked out the side of the wagon even more with yet more coffee stir sticks. This is to make the windows and the door look like they're actually recessed into the build and not just slapped on the side. Plus, this height variation gives a more visual interest when looking at the wagon. It's time to enhance our illusion of quality craftsmanship that we have going for this build. I decided to do that by adding some rivet details, by bedazzling the entire wagon in rhinestones. Honestly, all these little details really are going to make painting a whole lot easier. Future Dave is going to thank me. Oh, hi there. Future Dave here. I've only been painting rivets for like the last, hour or so. So, thanks for that, Fast Dave. Then, I decided to make a tiny little door handle out of this bit I found from an old earring jewelry kit. Huh. So now I get to do this all again on the other side. Now, the original driver of the Mordheim Stagecoach looks like he had to sit on the most uncomfortable seat I've ever seen. This tiny little bum has a more comfortable seat. Now, I wanted to make sure my driver and his assistant were removable. So while we're on the subject of tiny little butts... No! So I used a pin vise to drill out a hole in a rather sensitive area of my model's anatomy. So if you're curious, this driver comes from a Highland Miniatures model kit. Both the driver and the passenger gunner are the same model, but the gunner has been converted from bits from Reptilian Overlord. Oh, and if you're curious about what resin I'm using, this awful color combination comes from mixing inland red resin with inland peach resin. If you're lucky enough to have a micro center in your area, this resin is affordable, but a little on the brittle side. I started by making a small box out of paper card from a leftover dessert box. Hey look, we can have our cake and craft with it too. That meant I had to glue a small strip of tin on top of the cardboard box. I then covered the entire seat in wood coffee stir sticks. So it's time to keep this craft rolling by making some wheels. Actually, I made 2 sets of wheels for this build. The first I built out of an old aluminum foil tube. But after posting photos over the Mordheim Facebook group, I got some lovely feedback that basically told me my wheels were too large. So I scrapped my Gravedigger monster truck build and decided to make these wheels out of PVC pipe. First, I had to make a jig, and I did this by gluing a water bottle cap on top of an old jam jar, and then I drilled a hole through both lids. I was then able to slide a cocktail skewer into the jig and a firm foundation to work on my wheel. I then drilled some holes into the PVC pipe and ran some toothpicks through them. This made the spokes for each wheel. Once I got the spokes mostly straight and the axle mostly center, I just glued it all together, snipped off each of the overhangs, and sanded it flat. I then added some extra height to these wheels by adding some craft foam tires. I then hid most of my glue crimes behind a giant rhinestone in the middle. I felt like these tires, for lack of a better word, were a little too bare. And I knew this wagon was going to need more traction in those cold Reichland winters. So I took some paper card and made little metal bands to go around each wheel. Then because I love painting rivets so much, I bedazzled each wheel. Oh, come on! So now that I got the wheels done, it's time to start working on the most important part of the wagon. The part no one will ever see. So the original plan was to keep this simple by just adding 2 small little cross beams. I then grabbed some zip ties and craft foam and made these into tiny little shocks. I then decided that future me would need some more fun details to paint. I then went ahead and put some wiring around the top with some garden wire. I'd like to think that this is where the nobles keep their luggage and their servants. That way the interior of the cabin isn't being filled up with the stench of poverty. I mean, what's the point of building a speeding vehicle if you don't have room to have an epic fight on top of it? Speaking of fights, I also kit bashed these goofy little mutants for this project, but more on them later. Then I decided to put an emblem on the side of the door, like the original model has, but I don't have a creepy mask design, and I'm too lazy to sculpt one right now. I grabbed this bit from an old Trader Space Marine kit I had lying around. The problem is, I only had one of these bits, and I really wanted the same design on both doors. So I took some PVA glue and glued it down to an old base I had lying around. So I poured myself a piping hot mug of water and brewed myself up a nice thermoplastic tea and made myself a mold. Once the mold was dry, I pressed in some green stuff. And gave it a warm glass of milk and left it overnight. The next day, I had a pretty good looking copy. I liked it so much that I made another one. Then I added my old bit back to the bits box. It's like Benjamin Franklin always said,
A model bit saved is a model bit earned, for a man with a large bits box will always impress French courtesans.
So, after hearing even more feedback from that Mordheim Facebook group, I decided to make a few small modifications to my wagon. The general consensus was that the windows needed to be a little smaller, and I agree with that. I accomplished this look by adding a frame to the inside of the window, and then I cut down a toothpick to break up the window pane. I also added a ladder made out of styrene rod and a step to make getting on and off the coach a little easier. The last thing I had to do to get this build ready was to wrap up the horses. But this part is extremely repetitive, so we're just going to montage our way through it.
That's a pretty sorry-looking wagon you got there, mister.
I reckon it could use a coat of paint.
Now, I don't profess to be a great painter, so I'm kind of going to breeze past this part. But the one thing I did know is I wanted this wagon to be garishly bright. The way I'm thinking about it, this is either a nobleman's wagon, and they're very proud of it, and they want everyone to see it, or it's the equivalent to a medieval taxi, and so it's got to be seen from every street corner. The icon on the side of the wagon, I painted yellow. This was done with a combination of traditional paints, Games Workshop washes, and contrast paints. I honestly think one of the strongest things about the contrast paint line is the way that you can kind of glaze it / wash it over other more traditional colors. I mean, this is a great way to shortcut your way through parts of the model you're really not looking forward to painting, like, say, horses. But I mean, what's the point of having a fantasy stagecoach if you don't have anyone to rob it? Since this build was completely inspired by the opening chapters of Cubicle 7's reprint of An Enemy Within, I decided to take the opportunity to make some mutants. But first, we need to take a trip back in time. Way back when, I backed the first Reaper Bones Kickstarter, and I still have quite a few of these models bouncing around in the old bits box. Let me tell you, Bones minis have come a long way since then. But these minis are still made from a very simple to cut PVC plastic, so they are perfect base for any mutant conversion. I just dug around in my bits box and pulled bits from all kinds of old models, and got a combination of mutants that range from unsettling to just plain goofy. So I went ahead and primed all these guys up with the wagon. Then I painted up each mutant with no real rhyme or reason. This whole project was extremely goofy, and really a great excuse to just try new techniques. Well, without any further more delay, let's roll those beauty shots.
And the drums of war are getting louder, a sound you never heard before. Gonna come to your town, gonna find your corner, and we'll soon be knocking on your door.
Yeah, well, I got lots of friends. I don't.